I'm really interested in disrupting the truth. Like I
Yeah.
wanted to talk to you when it came up that I had the opportunity to talk to you. I wanted to talk to you about this because I'm in the midst of this research about Jim Morrison's death,
Yeah.
and how he died is not at all what they say the truth is. It's just not it. And I'm convinced of it. And there's a lot of cases like this that are super obvious that we just kind of accept. And that's not, to me, that's not conspiracy theorizing. It's getting at the truth.
You've reached American History Hotline. You ask the questions, we get the answers. Leave a message.
Hey there, American History Hotliners. Bob Crawford here. Thrilled to be joining you again for another episode of American History Hotline, the show where you ask the questions. And the best way to get us a question is through our new website, AmericanHistoryHotline.com. That's AmericanHistoryHotline.com. Okay, today's question is about the Lizard King. Choose the day, the sign of the day, the day's divinity, the first thing you see, a radiant beach and a cool jeweled moon. Couples naked race down by its quiet shore, and we laugh like children in this. I don't remember it, but when I was a teenager, I knew it by heart. Today, we're going to answer Rick's question. He writes, I saw this thing online that Jim Morrison's father started the Vietnam War. I was like, what? Did that really happen? Well, Rick, as the kids say, that question was not on my bingo card. Luckily, I've got the perfect guest to get to the bottom of your question. Joining me now is Jake Brennan. He's the host of the podcast Disgraceland. It combines history and music. Sounds like it's right up my alley. And it's a little gritty, I have to say. Jake, welcome to the show.
Psyched to be here, Bob. Thanks for having me, man.
Jake, I apologize for my riffing on my teenage Jim Morrison poetry stance. I don't know what that is.
You were channeling the Lizard King.
I'm
Apologies
channeling what I'm really doing at 55 years old is channeling my youth is what I'm trying to do here.
Love it.
It doesn't hit as well at this age as it did at 19. Jake, I've read a little bit about this mystery.
Mm-hmm.
First off, tell me a little bit about Jim Morrison's father. What was his role in the military?
He was an admiral. He was the rear admiral, and he was in charge of the Pacific Fleet during the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But he's a military man, true and true, from World War II, where he was at Pearl Harbor, saw the destruction there, and he was on a fast track to becoming an officer. And Jim grew up, he's born of the baby boom, and Jim grew up with his two siblings as, what they call military brats, so to speak. And he lived in and around bases. His dad was in the Navy, so it was a little different from, being in the Air Force or in the Army, where, not only are you going to where your father is stationed if you're Jim Morrison, but then your dad is off at sea for a large chunk of that time. And that was his upbringing, basically in and around these naval bases throughout the United States, while his dad is sort of climbing the ranks through the officer class.
So tell us about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. That's August of 1964. So where was that, and what was Jim Morrison's father doing there?
So the Gulf of Tonkin incident, this is in and around Vietnam, and we had American warships stationed prior to the Vietnam War, where we had a small amount of small military presence, quote unquote advisors, as they called them, in Vietnam, who were, again, quote unquote, advising the South Vietnamese in the conflict with the North Vietnamese. This is 1964, and Jim Morrison's father is there, and he's in charge of the entire fleet. He's the guy. He's the Johnny on the spot, being commanded, I believe, from Pearl Harbor, but he is the guy who is there, and like I said, in charge of command of the fleet that is advising the South Vietnamese.
So the attack itself, there's some mystery surrounding it, right?
Yeah, this is one of those. I have a complicated relationship with conspiracy theories.
Yeah, me too. But tell me yours.
Well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I have a different I don't, a lot of people think conspiracy theories are like a bunch of guys get in a room and they kind of get their pens out and they make a plan and then they go off and they kill the president and no one says anything. And that's just not how I think these things happen. I remember a time not too long ago when you were considered to be wearing a tinfoil hat if you thought that John F. Kennedy was assassinated by anyone besides Lee Harvey Oswald. And now it's kind of grown into accepted fact. And I've always believed that somebody else was acting besides Oswald, or perhaps with Oswald. But that's kind of the thing with Gulf of Tonkin. There was a time when it was considered to be pure conspiracy if you believed that anything nefarious went on there that the then President Lyndon Johnson in 1964 used to secure support from Congress to fund the military conflict that became the Vietnam War. But now it's kind of accepted as fact where, yeah, it was, I don't want to say it wasn't a false flag. A lot of people say that. They say it was a false flag, but by the very definition of a false flag, it was not that. But it was not, Johnson's depiction of what happened was not an honest depiction of what happened. And he used that deceit to justify our involvement in the war.
So I'm going to just confess here. I don't know. I know general facts about the Vietnam War, but that World War II as well. Like that, this is not my 20th century is not my area of what I would say, if I have one, expertise.
Sure,
like
sure.
19th century, 1820, 1850 is kind of my ball game.
Yeah.
So I'm going on just what I've researched, but it sounds like on August 2nd, 1964, several North Vietnamese patrol boats attacked the destroyer, the Maddox.
That's correct.
There were no U.S. casualties.
That's correct.
And the vessel escaped, having only been hit by a single bullet. Allegedly, right, on August 4th, both the Maddox and the USS Turner Joy reported that several unidentified vessels were approaching their positions. So there's no evidence that the Vietnamese attacked the U.S. Maddox or the Turner Joy on August 4th.
When you get into the nitty gritty of it, you're absolutely right. The depiction is pretty spot on. August 2nd, shots were fired at U.S. naval, at the destroyer, the Maddox, in the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, whether the Maddox fired first on the torpedo boats from the North Vietnamese, that's up for debate. But there was a skirmish, and we essentially destroyed the North Vietnamese torpedo boats that were in the skirmish with the Maddox. 2 days later, there's another skirmish. And what happens here, however, it's a different day. On the 2nd, it's a beautiful day. It's sunny. There's no clouds. You can see forever. On the 4th, it's kind of the opposite. It's not raining, but it's cloudy. It's overcast. It's hard to see. It's hard to see, with the planes that were giving coverage and they couldn't see in the ocean as well either, because the weather was different. Supposedly there's more shots are fired on these U.S. naval ships and they fire back. Now what happens is immediately after this interaction, whoever's commanding the boat that was in the action, they immediately radio in that, we got this wrong. We misread our intelligence. We don't believe that these boats were coming for us and that we're attacked. And as I've read it, Jim Morrison's father, George Stephen Morrison, who again is in command of these ships, he finds out what actually happened. And he actually radios into Pearl Harbor, which is the command here, and says, hey, we weren't actually fired upon. And they then relay that information to the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. And as the story goes, which I don't necessarily believe, McNamara fails to give this crucial detail to President Johnson because they want the war, or so the story goes.
So just to clarify here, there's no evidence that George Morrison lied about any of this.
No, but in the popular culture, there is this myth that exists, and you can go on YouTube and you can go on Twitter and you can watch clips of big name podcasters who are MMA fighters talking about and I've had fun with this as well because it's a cute story. The singer of the Doors' dad is responsible for the Vietnam War. It's not entirely accurate. He was at the center of this action, but the core of the truth, I believe he was actually one of the honest brokers here.
Right.
And I don't believe that Robert McNamara was honest. I don't necessarily believe he withheld the information from his commander in chief. Maybe he gave him a version of the truth and they massaged the truth to get what they wanted out of Congress, which was funding for the military action. We never actually declared war, I don't believe, in Vietnam, but it was just a prolonged action. But that was the point where he actually secured the funds to escalate. And within a year, we had 2,000 ground troops on the ground in Vietnam because of that incident. Now, Jim Morrison's dad, there was no stink on him after this. His career goes off like gangbusters after this. I mean, he has a pretty decorated career throughout the time that Jim's fame is sort of taking off and his celebrity is exploding, and even beyond after Jim's death.
I think my perception is that probably 90% of the time, the commissioned officers are honest brokers.
Yes.
They're calling it the way they see it.
Yep.
It's the civilian leaders, right? That's what we do in this country. We have civilian leaders in charge of the military, the defense secretary. So it does not strain my credulity. It doesn't strain credulity for me to think that if there was a lie here, it came from the top of the chain, which beneath Kennedy or beneath Johnson was McNamara. Tell me, so before the Gulf of Tonkin, just to, again, I'm expressing my own ignorance here. It was a conflict, right? Like we weren't at war in Vietnam until the Gulf of Tonkin.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
And Kennedy had committed the troops there at first and was, by all accounts, going to scale back America's involvement in Vietnam. And Johnson wanted the war, supposedly, for what reasons? I mean, there's some pretty craven reasons that people talk about. He held stock in some of the military industrial companies that would have benefited from the war, but that's just so blatant.
Okay, what else you got?
I know it's so easy. It doesn't. You know what I mean? I think what's at the core of a lot of epic mistakes in history, including the assassination of John F. Kennedy, is hubris.
That's right.
And I think that more than anything had to do. Johnson saw himself as this, and he was larger than life. And I'm sure he felt a level of invincibility after just assassinating the president. No, I'm kidding. After just becoming president, and I'm joking about that. And really felt that he was doing what was in the interest of the American people. But as we all learned, it really wasn't.
I think people grab for conspiracy theories because they're looking for an easy answer.
Yes.
Like that's kind of making sense of a world that makes no sense.
Yeah. And I don't understand. I mean, I'm really interested in disrupting the truth. Like I wanted to talk to you when it came up that I had the opportunity to talk to you. I wanted to talk to you about this because I'm in the midst of this research about Jim Morrison's death.
Yeah.
And how he died is not at all what they say the truth is. It's just not it. And I'm convinced of it. And there's a lot of cases like this that are super obvious that we just kind of accept. And that's not conspiracy theorizing. It's getting at the truth. It's the same thing with the gentleman who was on your show a couple episodes ago talking about where Thomas Jefferson got the inspiration for the Declaration of Independence. It's like, what, we don't want to know the truth? Why wouldn't we want to know the truth? It doesn't make us conspiracy theorists.
You know what gives credit to that claim for me personally is John Adams called him on it.
Right.
And that's an area where I do have some expertise in the Adams family. And that is a first-rate John Adams move.
Yes.
For him to give Jefferson crap over that.
Right.
That's what buddies do.
And you know the character of John Adams.
Yeah.
And I always look at intention. Like, what are the intentions of these folks? And how do they stand to benefit by saying what they're
Right.
saying? And oftentimes when somebody is saying that something is true and it can come back, they don't benefit from saying it. You know what I mean? Like what
Yeah.
is John Adams? I mean, he at the point he's saying that to Jefferson, these guys are in their 80s. They've already like outlived their life expectancy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there was no X, there was no YouTube. They're not fishing for clicks. You know what I
No.
mean?
And they had they had repaired the breach in their friendship.
Right.
So like, of course your buddy's going to call you on your BS.
Right.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
That's how we do.
Exactly.
This is American History Hotline. I'm your host, Bob Crawford. Today, my guest is Jake Brennan. He is the host of the podcast Disgraceland. We're talking about Jim Morrison's father, George Morrison, possibly starting the Vietnam War. Remember, send us your burning questions about American history to our brand new website, AmericanHistoryHotline.com. AmericanHistoryHotline.com. I want to say American History Hotline at gmail.com, but we are no longer just a Gmail account. We are now a bona fide webpage, AmericanHistoryHotline.com. Now back to the show. Okay, so George Morrison, he is either unwittingly or wittingly getting us involved in the Vietnam War, the conflict that will define the culture, like, right, not only the direction of the country militaristically or in foreign affairs, but this war, 1964, is going to define the rest of the 60s and half of the 70s. And really, if you think about Born in the USA and what comes in the 80s,
Even now.
yes, it's going to define the rest of the 20th century.
I mean, think of our politics today and the people, the baby boomers who are still in power, and they have massive influence on us, and all of that was born of Vietnam, of that conflict.
So while George Morrison was doing this, what was Jim Morrison doing in 64?
In 64, Morrison, I think, is at UCLA at this point, and he just graduated college, and he.
By the way, just a little table setting.
Mm.
The Beatles have just performed on Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
That's 64, right?
Yes, 64.
Okay.
Early 64 is the Beatles. Kennedy, of course, is assassinated in late 63. Morrison might be in junior college before UCLA. First Doors album comes out in 66, I think. So 64, 65, he ends up in UCLA. But he famously had the depiction of his relationship with his family is really sad. It's really it's too simplistic. You know, he basically starts the Doors, calls home, tells his parents he's going to be in a rock band. He's not going to go to Hollywood and make films. And his dad is like, what are you talking about? You can't sing. You know, his dad has like a honest reaction. And I know that sounds so harsh through the lens of modern parenting, but you have to keep in mind the context of the difference in those generations. You have a military man, a World War II veteran, and you have the first and most radically different generation of children compared to their parents that America's ever seen. Like, this is like the long hair, meaning just hair beyond your ears. You know what I mean? Like everything is extremely radical, and these parents don't understand. And it comes off now as being completely insensitive and ignorant. But I can understand how a father would be like, well, I've heard you sing, man. You can't, what are you doing? You can't.
Well, any father, you don't want your, I mean, it just.
Right.
I mean, maybe some dads today. I mean.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was a full-time musician myself, and my kid plays bass, and God bless him. But if he comes to me when he's 18, he's like, Dad, I'm going to start a band and go on the road. Basically what I did, I'm going to be like, don't do that.
Yeah.
You're going to be, it's so hard. It's so hard. Let's find an easier path. So, but he got the early 60s version of that from his dad. And the Doors take off very quickly. And there's a story about his younger brother is at home one day, and his friend comes over the house, And he's like, dude, check this out. And he shows him the first Doors album with Jim on the cover. And he's like, oh my God. And the young brother realizes, I've been listening to Light My Fire now for months, and I didn't know it was my brother. No idea.
So why did the Doors take so quickly? Like, what was it? Like, was it that the Beatles had hit, and then the Stones hit, and like labels are just signing these bands left and right? Or is it like, was it something else?
I think it was a combination of a little bit of what you're talking about. It was right place, right time. It was Southern California, it was Venice, it was Los Angeles Sunset Strip, and the whiskey right when that scene was a hotbed for the music industry, looking for new acts. You have the Laurel Canyon thing starting to take place up there. And you have the record industry spending a lot of money to make a lot of money. There wasn't a ton of competition, and the Doors were great. I don't care what anybody says, and I've had my ups and downs with the Doors. They were an objectively great band, and Jim Morrison was objectively one of the greatest frontmen to ever do it. And at the time, he was completely unique. There was no one like him that had that the poetry plus the sort of rock star piece of it as well. And he was a phenomenon. The band, they wrote hits, man. They wrote huge hits.
Yeah. There's no like, look, I think the Soft Parade is an incredible album.
Yes, it is.
I think, what is the one, Love Street? What album's that on?
On
Waiting for the Sun's incredible. I mean, I think they have a lot of great songs. They were a great band. I started this episode by quoting, is it Ghost Dance or Ghost Song? One of Jim Morrison's poems that I just remember from being a teenager. And I want to ask you what I was going to lead into here, before I got on this little tangent, is drug culture, and how important drug culture was to music culture at this particular time.
Yeah.
And so I hit a point going through a lot of the things that I've had challenges I've had as an adult, where I look at Jim Morrison and I'm like, man, he was just an egomaniac, drug addict kid who really hadn't lived. He was just so anyway, I was critical, to my wife about him a few times, and I will never live it down, I'm sure. And if I do compliment his music, it just whatever. But no, I have to say that I went through a period where I absolutely love their music, and I still appreciate the musicality of it. I just hit a point in life where the personality of Jim Morrison I could no longer relate to.
Oh yeah, I hear that completely, and I've had my same bouts with the caricature of Jim. And we did a whole series in our 27 Club series. We did like 10 episodes on Jim, where we really get into the buffoonery of it. That's part like
right. That is it. That's it. Yes.
Yeah, he was a drunken buffoon at times.
That's right. That's what I'm getting at.
There's no denying it. And he had a very juvenile point of view on drugs and alcohol and living life, and his idea of living life. You say he hadn't lived, and there's an argument to be made for that for sure, but he would, I think, tell you that he lived more full than most people ever did, and that was part of his whole trip.
Right.
But he comes off it, like I said, as a drunken buffoon a lot of times. Meanwhile, I actually think he truly was a poet. Truly, like, and he was very well read. And even when you see interviews with his father later in life, he has great admiration for his son's intellect, if not his singing ability. But I think that he died at 27, and the story ends for us there with him. I think had he lived, his artistry would have taken on more of a serious tone that assumes that he would have gotten through his alcoholism. And, the drug culture thing that you reference is kind of misleading with Jim Morrison, because, he died officially of heart failure. The unofficial cause of death is a heroin overdose, which is strange for a guy who famously hated heroin and never did heroin.
All right. Well, let's talk about this. I was going to save this for later, but we're here. So let's just talk about this. Talk about his death and what you've learned about it.
Well, he dies in Paris. And of course, the myth we heard growing up, we're relatively the same age, was that he faked his own death so that he could escape the trappings of rock
Right.
stardom.
Yes, of course he did.
And and there's actually, if you know, the details that were known at the time when he died. First of all, faking his own death is in character with how he lived, right?
Right.
Like even his sister's like, oh yeah, that's totally something he would have done. But the details we had is there a guy from the management company heads over to Paris immediately after he finds out that he died, and there's a death certificate, and the casket's closed, and they're like going to bury him that day, and there was no autopsy, and this information starts to peter out, and people are like, well, that's sketchy, and then the myth takes hold that he faked his death. But there are numerous accounts since then of tens of people in and out of that apartment in the immediate hours and day after he died, with the body just lying there. Like
how long was he dead before he was discovered?
He was discovered that like hours after he died, and there's some debate about how many hours, by his common law wife Pamela Corson, who calls authorities, and she calls a couple of friends, and they come over, and it's kind of a shit show. It's like cops, detectives, investigators, firemen, everyone's coming, the doors open. I've read depictions of like neighbors who lived in the building who just kind of wandered in to see what was happening, and there was Jim's body lying on the bed, you know. So there's a lot of credible evidence of people seeing the body, even though nobody besides Pamela and two of his friends who were there in the immediate aftermath can attest to seeing the body. But those two friends, their accounts didn't come out until years later.
But there's confirmation that he was dead.
There's confirmation that he was dead. There is no autopsy. There's a
but we do know that, and again, I know nothing about this, or if I knew anything about it as a younger man when I was really into this stuff, I've forgotten it. So but just so I understand this, so he dies.
Yes.
His wife, for lack of a better description, finds him, knows something's wrong. He's not responsive. He's unresponsive. She calls friends, and she calls the authorities.
Yes.
The authorities come, and they're like, he's dead.
Yes.
And they put him in a bag, and they zip him up.
No.
Oh, okay.
He's dead. He's in the tub filled with water.
Oh, okay.
Dies in the bathtub.
Okay.
It's 4th of July weekend. Not that mattered over there. It mattered here, but it is the weekend. He dies on a Friday night going into a Saturday.
Okay.
And they're French. I don't know, but it's something with the culture. They're basically like, we're not moving the body.
What?
Yeah. And she doesn't want them to move the body yet because she wants to have more time with Jim. So
But he's in this way, like, I'm just imagining the physics of this, or there you have a dead body, which is probably immediately begins to decompose in some ways. And he's in water, which I know if you take a long bath, your fingers prune.
Yeah.
So what's going on here?
They pack the tub with ice.
And the authorities are okay with this.
They're okay with this. And
Sacre bleu.
she stays with her beautiful Jim, as she calls him, for a couple days until
days.
Yeah, I think it was at least a night. It might have been 2 nights. I'm not exactly sure. This has nothing to do with the mystery, however.
But we know this. This is all fact.
This is all fact. However, the official cause of death, they were very concerned. They did not want it to get out that he died from a heroin overdose.
Who is they?
Pam, his common law wife, also a notorious heroin addict. And again, Jim did not do heroin. And he has 2 friends there. Alan, his last name is escaping me, and a female filmmaker at the time. They're both there. And they didn't want the heroin news to come out because it's just, then it was so much more risque than it is now. And they didn't want that to be the cause of death. So they get the heart failure cause of death that they want. It has nothing to do with heroin on the death certificate.
And so was it easy to work the refs, if you will, to work the French authorities, the Parisian authorities, and say, we prefer you not write heroin here. But you say there's no autopsy, so how do you prove heroin?
Exactly. And now here's where it gets really interesting. Again, he didn't use heroin. She did use heroin.
Right, but
he did not use heroin. This is the thing. You talk to anybody who knew him, and he did not use heroin. And there's this really shady character who Pamela was seeing over the course of her relationship with Jim. The guy's name is Count de Brutel, who was literally a French count. He was a young guy who had diplomatic parents and used those connections after he started going to UCLA, used those connections to curry drugs from Turkey and Morocco into Los Angeles. And he was basically the heroin dealer to the stars.
So how do we know this aspect of it? Like who this guy was, and was he ever caught doing this?
This is very well documented by numerous people in the music industry. In fact, I haven't been able to totally lock this down. I will at some point, or I won't. But it's believed that he supplied Janis Joplin with the heroin that killed her.
Okay. Who do we have any musicians that we would know?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Give me a couple names. A name.
So the Count, okay?
Okay.
The Count, the day Janis Joplin dies in Los Angeles, which is like a couple months or the year, 6 months before Jim Morrison, something like that. Jim's in LA. When she dies, 9 other people die from heroin that weekend in Los Angeles, all connected to the same connection of heroin, including, this comes from a singer named Miss Mercy, who was part of the GTOs, which was part of Frank Zappa's Cavalcade of Stars. They were a band that he was mentoring. But that's small potatoes compared with the next bit of information we get. While the Count was seeing Pamela Morrison, who Jim hated the Count, he was also seeing Marianne Faithfull, who he hooked up with through his affiliation with Keith Richards. Now, you have to remember, this exact same time that Jim Morrison dies in France, the Stones are at the south of France making Exile on Main Street. And the Count, prior to coming to France, was living in Keith Richards' home in England, which is where he connects with Marianne Faithfull. Goes to Paris with Marianne Faithfull, okay? Marianne Faithfull attests in her autobiography, the night Jim Morrison dies, the Count gets a call at where they're staying in Paris from Pam Morrison, who says Jim has died, right? Marianne Faithfull doesn't know what's going on the phone yet, but she just knows that she has an opportunity here to potentially meet Jim Morrison. So she's like, great, I want to come, and then all of a sudden he's like, no, you're staying here. I'm going by myself. He goes over there. There's other accounts. Again, this Alan guy whose name is escaping me, and the filmmaker, the friends of Jim Morrison, who are at the home when the Count gets there. So basically the Count is summoned, the theory is, by Pamela on cleanup duty, because if you've seen the movie The French Connection, that heroin, which the Count was trafficking, was a type of heroin that was called cotton candy because of the way it looked. It was pink, it was whitish, it looked like cocaine. And what Marianne Faithfull attests to, and again, we talk about John Adams and the incentive here to lie or to tell the truth. Marianne Faithfull has no incentive to lie. Her take is that Jim Morrison found what he thought to be cocaine in the apartment, snorted it. It was actually Pam's heroin, and that's how he overdosed. And that the Count was there on cleanup duty with Pamela.
Wow.
Pretty nuts. And there's a lot more to it. I'm going to have it all in an episode. I'll have it all laid out, sourced, the entire thing. But when you look at Marianne Faithfull's account of this, there's no incentive for her to lie. In fact, it's the opposite.
So it's funny. We start this on one conspiracy theory about Jim's father and the beginning of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And here we've come to this other conspiracy theory. But
Yes.
There's yet another conspiracy theory involving Jim Morrison.
Okay.
And I want to pivot to that for a moment before we can conclude. you made the claim that Jim Morrison was the Zodiac killer,
Yes.
but it was a joke.
Yes.
It was a joke, right?
Total satire. Yes.
But it went viral.
Yes, it did.
So where did you get the idea, and did you expect it people to be so receptive to it?
I did not expect a reaction. This was back in around, I released that episode in 2019. Here's what happened. I heard someone made the claim that Ted Cruz was the Zodiac killer. And I was really
Oh my gosh.
I was really offended by the lack of intellectual curiosity that's behind that claim, because it just doesn't line up. Like his height doesn't line up, his age doesn't line up. And I started to think, because I had started Disgraceland, which is a music podcast. I was like, what rock stars could actually be, because you make the claim, we're the Zodiac killer? And
I mean, what time period is the Zodiac killer?
This exact same time. This is the beauty of this theory that is complete and total. I mean,
because you've got Charles Manson around this time doing causing mayhem and murder and whatnot. So it's not completely out of the realm of, at least conceiving it, right? Putting a rock star in that situation.
Yes, exactly. And when I looked into the Doors tour dates, and I realized that the off dates were days when Zodiac's victims were killed in California, I really knew I was onto something. Not to mention the height and weight of Jim Morrison. He's a big guy. You could make that correlation as well. So I released it as a April Fool's episode on a Monday. My episodes typically come on Tuesdays, and I came in with an emergency episode on a Monday. And literally the first thing you hear in the episode is, this episode is satirical. Like, that's the first thing you hear, but people just blew past that.
Of course they did.
And thank God. And it took off, and it actually, I mean, it was covered. It was all over the internet, but it was covered in Boston, where I'm from. It was covered. A news station ran with it. It really freaked me out. It really was like, a lot of people were writing in. They missed the joke part of it. Even at the end, I say this is an April Fool's joke. It was released on the 1st of April, and it really freaked me out. But since then, the joke is obvious, and if you listen to it, I mean, come on, it's so crazy.
So, circling back to the original topic of this conversation, the Gulf of Tonkin and George Morrison and his involvement in that. Did Jim Morrison ever talk about this?
No, he distanced himself from his parents.
Completely, just clean break.
Yeah, he even claimed they were killed. And
So from the time the Doors began to his own passing, he never spoke with anyone in his family?
He spoke with his mom a couple times on the phone. He did speak with his sister. I'm not sure about his little brother. I think he had a pretty good relationship with his sister, actually. And the dad, I believe it's the family's contention that the reason Jim estranged himself was because he didn't want to mess up his dad's career. He didn't want to become this sort of famous albatross to his father, who was climbing the ranks. And if you actually, it's quite heartbreaking. And I have a large amount of empathy for George Stephen Morrison. If you watch the interview that he gave toward the end of his life about his son, it's very honest, and it's kind of heartbreaking, and it's brutally honest. This guy who never really knew his son, but clearly has a lot of reverence for what his son achieved, and went to great lengths to make sure that his grave, that the monument that's there is in keeping with what Jim would have wanted. He hired like a guy who was a Greek guy to come up with the quote, and made sure that it was something that Jim would want. And it's really he gives a beautiful tribute to his son, which completely is in contrast with the depiction of their relationship, the rock god and the sort of rear admiral naval officer father.
Well, because of the direction this conversation turned, I've enjoyed every minute of it, by the way. But circling back to the Vietnam War, there were 58,000 American casualties in the war, according to the U.S. National Archives. A majority of those were killed in action. There were more than 800,000 Vietnamese deaths. Could this have all been avoided if not for the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
I think Lyndon Johnson was going to get his war no matter what.
No matter what. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jake, this has been an incredible conversation. I've enjoyed our time together. Really excited about your podcast. I'm going to dive in after talking with you today and become an expert on all you do. And I hope you would consider coming on the show again sometime.
Bob, I would love it. Your show is my new favorite podcast. I'm pumped to have been given the opportunity to come on here and talk to you today and to your fans. So thank you so much.
Jake Brennan is the host of the Disgraceland podcast. It is a fun show. Please add it to your list. Jake, thanks for joining us today on American History Hotline.
My pleasure.